The war drums are beating loudly in the halls of Congress while leading Obama officials continue to try to convince the House to vote as the Senate Foreign Relations Committee did for military strikes on Syria. If Congress votes no, the world will be watching to see if Obama has the audacity to take unilateral action without even the support of his own government. Now, amidst the sea of propaganda and warmongering, there's one politician in the UK that has been a vocal opponent to this new war. His name is George Galloway, and he's a founding member of the Respect Party in Parliament. Well, earlier I spoke with him about the repercussions a military strike could have on the region as well as the rest of the world. Check it out. Sadly, my birthday wish doesn't look like it's going to come true. Let's talk about the latest on Syria. There's talk of using fighter jets and training rebel forces on the ground instead of just arming them. Why is it that the U.S. is aligning itself with the same terrorist organization it claims to be fighting in the war on terror, George?
Indeed, and the relatives of those who were lost on 9/11, who were cruelly murdered in their thousands, must be asking themselves how their country ended up in bed with Al-Qaeda, and not just in bed, but arming them to the teeth, acting as their air force and their armorer and their financier. It is one of the most grotesque about faces in all history, and the people of the United States overwhelmingly oppose it, but their political leaders appear to be ready to endorse it. Behind me is the British Parliament, normally a lapdog, a poodle of American political leaders, but just the other week we revolted and stood up and said this far and no further, no war in Syria. And that too reflected overwhelmingly the popular opinion in the country. But the United States has not been stopped, even by the failure of the British to show up in another shooting war.
Yeah, I mean, the hypocrisy is running really strong, George, and I was surprised to see the criminal conspirators from doctoring the Iraq intelligence in the British Parliament vote no. It made me really happy. A lot of proud moments there from the world leaders. And as we've seen unfold in Iraq post-occupation, there's now a complete civil war rife with sectarian violence. It's a complete disaster. Is it that the decision makers don't understand the religion and the region, or is it that they just don't care?
I don't think religion has anything to do with it. Religions believe in the prophets, peace be upon them. Our leaders believe in the prophets and how to get a bigger piece of them. It's about domination. It's about Israel. It's about the projection of American power and the terrifying of potential rivals and competitors. In this case, principally Russia and China. I don't think that they're acting very terrified at this moment. And so the United States is in for a contested war in Syria. And that's why the congressional representatives would be wise to heed the lesson of Iraq. The United States lost thousands of soldiers and tens of thousands of wounded soldiers, maimed many of them forever, and many of them committing suicide or murdering people when they got home in the decades since. And many of them, of course, ending up on the streets, homeless and jobless. And the congressional representatives ought to beware that what will begin with a flurry of Tomahawk missiles, and how obscene is it that the United States calls its killing weapons after the people that it annihilated in order to occupy the country in the first place. It will start with a flurry of Tomahawk cruise missiles, but it will end in a shooting war on the ground and with an occupation, and one in a country with 23 religious and ethnic groups within it, and in the most combustible possible piece of territory on the earth. The Syrian people will fight them back. Syria's friends will fight them back, and they will fight them back everywhere, not just in Syria.
You know, I say it's like we're killing Syrians to show the Syrian regime that killing Syrians is wrong. I just can't wrap my head around it, George, and the stakes are very high, as you just outlined.
Well, put this one in your mind, Abby. The next time you see President Obama happy clapping in a Christian church, the Al-Qaeda sacked a town called Ma'alula, which I know very well in Syria, where the people are the last people on earth still conducting their Christian services in the language of Jesus, in Aramaic. It is one of the most serene and beautiful and peaceful places on the earth, filled with Christian churches and monasteries and nunneries. And the people there were slaughtered over the last 4 days literally slaughtered, with their necks, their throats cut, their heads sawn off. The Christian churches are on fire at the hands of Al-Qaeda. That's Al-Qaeda, paid for and armed by the United States of America.
It makes me physically ill to hear that, George, that we're actually bombing the cradle of civilization, the birthplace of humanity. We're not respecting the birthplace of Christianity in terms of these leaders who claim that they're Christian. George, we've both been reporting
they're never done telling us.
Yeah,
they're never done telling us how Christian they are.
Exactly.
They wear it on their sleeves.
Well, you know, we've both been reporting that a British firm allegedly sold nerve gas to Syria. Let's wrap our minds around this one. 10 months after the civil war broke out. Also, the Digital Journal is reporting that the Saudi intelligence gave the rebels chemical weapons. Why are these insanely contradictory facts not reported on in such a serious climate of debate?
Well, we can't even get them in the British so-called mainstream media. The fact that Carla Ponte, the United Nations rapporteur, in May of this year, just a few months ago, at the beginning of the summer, this summer, reported that the Syrian rebels had used the very sarin nerve gas that they're telling us now must have been used by the Assad regime. The Turkish authorities captured a group of Syrian rebels making their way across the Turkish border, bearing loads of this very sarin gas. They're trying to pretend that you have to be a state to have your hands on sarin gas. But less than 20 years ago, a group of Shinto obscurantists living on the lip of Mount Fuji in Tokyo used this gas in the Tokyo underground, killing and maiming a very large number of people in the name of Shinto. So any group, any gang, any mob of gangsters can get their hands on sarin gas. And I'm absolutely convinced that the Russian President Putin is correct. I don't believe he'd be continuing to insist upon it if he had any doubt about it, that this weaponry either was an accidental discharge from the rebels' stockpile or was a deliberate provocation to bring in the Western powers into this war, which, of course, as soon as President Obama drew a red line on this issue, he was openly inviting. So that's one point. But the other point is this. Behind me in the British Parliament in the 1920s, Winston Churchill said this upon dropping chemical weapons on Iraqi Kurds. He said, and I quote, "I don't understand what all the fuss is about, dropping gas on rebel tribesmen in the north of Iraq. We have been dropping chemical weapons on people of the so-called third world for the best part of a century. The United States dropped an ocean of chemical weapons on the people of Vietnam, and their children are still being born today deformed as a result of it. The United States used chemical weapons against the Iraqi resistance in Fallujah just a decade ago, and Israel used chemical weapons against the Palestinian people in Gaza just 3 years ago. The hypocrisy is monumental. It's of Everestian proportions.
It's astounding,
but the media,
George,
simply will not report this.
It's astounding. And yeah, I mean, the toxic legacy in Fallujah is even astronomically more than Hiroshima, shockingly enough. And as you said on the floor of Parliament, you said, would Assad be insane enough to launch a chemical weapons attack on the exact same day that UN weapons inspectors arrived in Damascus? And if he is that insane, what's going to happen when we do launch Tomahawk cruise missiles over the region? George, I wanted to move on to Israel. You mentioned Israel before. Right now, they are lobbying super hard on the Hill right now. AIPAC is going out on a full-on lobbying campaign for serious strikes. How much of this war is about Israel?
Well, it's a full court press by the Israel lobby in Britain and in the United States. They failed in Britain. They appear to be succeeding in the United States, and at least it unmasks a pretty monumental conspiracy. John Kerry told the world that the Arab regimes in the Persian Gulf are going to pay for this war. Israel is lobbying hard for the war and getting ready for it. So we have the most grotesque coalition ever assembled in history. Al-Qaeda, the United States, Israel, Saudi Arabia, and other Persian Gulf states. Who could have made such a scenario up? But be careful what you wish for, because I'm certain that Israel will be in this war big time and very quickly. because I'm certain that Syria and its friends will immediately turn the war, take the war to Israel in the first hours after the United States bombardment of Syria begins. Israel, presumably, will retaliate and enter the war. We'll then have an Arab-Israeli war fought on top of the oil fields and in the midst of one of the worst depressions that the developed world has ever seen. So look out for the oil price rocketing, perhaps quadrupling, as it did in 1973-74. Look out for the Straits of Hormuz being blocked and no oil moving out of the Gulf to the world. Look out for the Suez Canal being blocked and attacked. Look out for war throughout the world. There's going to be murder and mayhem throughout the world. That's what happy, clappy, Mr. Christian, Barack Obama, who just the other day was hailing the memory of Martin Luther King, is about to visit on the world.